Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Budget Balancing Committee meeting of February 26, 2025. Thank you for joining us. We do have the representatives from the Board of Selectmen and FinCom here at the table. For the school committee, Teresa Stewart is participating remotely, and Anne Marie Mazzola will be joining us shortly, assuming all goes well. So, thank you everyone for coming back. First order of business is approval of minutes from our February 6th meeting. Thank you, Melanie. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Bill.
As
Is there a
submitted.
second? Second by Matt. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll put it to a vote. Teresa?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next order of business is to discuss shared costs again and any updates on the estimates. Jeff, is this you?
Sure, I mean, we can, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me start with the good news, because I never have good news. Blue Hill's number came in, and it's actually down about 150 grand from last year's number, so we'd had a projection of, I think, 5 or 6%, so we made that adjustment, so that's a net of, call it $350,000, so I call that a win.
That's reflected in here?
Yes. And Perrick and our own retirement board are taking forever with the retirement number. We feel confident with the number that we have in there. It may come in a hair under that. I know the funding schedule has seemed to show that. We're getting whacked like a lot of retirement boards on a couple of things. People are living longer, which is a good thing. And then just their actuarial adjustments for actual wage and employment growth. So as well as I think they shaved the discount rate down a little bit. It's important to note, not that it's a direct factor all the time, but every time town meeting approves either a COLA or other adjustment for the retirement board, that throws our actuarials off, and that's usually a future adjustment. That being said, this is also similar to our health insurance increase, not uncommon for retirement boards throughout the state. I know the Norfolk County system, we're not a part of it, but it encompasses most of the towns in the area, is going through HEC dealing with their retirement assessments. So that might shave down, but I don't think it's going to come down to.
Actually, the funding schedule was approved today by Perrick, so those numbers are right in line with where we should be.
Okay, so the retirement and pension contribution last year, or I guess for the current year, was a little over 6 million, and then for FY26 we're looking at a little over 7 million.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, what I note is that if you look at the increase in pension and at health insurance, which are things you have to pay, that's probably around $3 million. And that's not that much less than the additional tax revenue we're going to be getting this year, both the 2.5% increase as well as new growth. So, I mean, it just limits what you can do in your budget when you have those shared costs, which essentially take up almost all of your tax increases for the given year.
Anne Marie, welcome. We've approved
you.
the minutes, and now we're just starting a conversation about shared costs.
Fabulous.
Blue Hills down a little bit from last year, which means, plus we had programmed in an increase, so that has helped us reduce our shared cost budget by $350,000. And then we were just talking about pensions and health insurance.
Which are both still comparative nightmares.
Right.
Just-
Collectively
Yeah, they
going
haven't
up by $3 million.
They haven't got any better, just FYI. Just so everyone knows, when you look sort of above the non-tax revenues, where that line indirect to the revenue, that's the portion of health and retirement that's paid for by light and water and sewer. So there's somewhat of an offset to them. For the purpose of balancing the budget, it gets treated as a whole revenue. The ultimate number that makes into the budget, it might show a smaller number because we're booking some of that cost out elsewhere. It's just to balance it. We always want to make sure we're remembering the full pension cost or the full health insurance cost, and then sort of subtracting it out. So you don't see that on the expense side, but on the revenue side, that's light and water sewer share of those costs.
Okay.
In terms of flexibility on the rest of the shared costs, there really isn't much. Medicare is up 6%, but remember that grows with general wage increase, as well as when we add a position. I mean, if we really were getting very detailed, if you add a position for $100,000 a year, we should be adding that additional direct cost. We just try to generally look at the payroll cost, but it's also an obligation. So we're trying to trend where we are every year. If we were to come up short, which we do some years, it's a number we have to make up. It's not there's no choice in there. In terms of the capital and the rolling stock, I think as everyone knows, we book a certain number of vehicles in the budget that are our regular rolling stock. Those costs tend to go up. We tend to, with state purchasing, as I always tell everyone, inflation hits a little bit later on municipal budgets, but the problem is those nice 3 years where we're getting cruisers for $42,000 a year for 3 years in a row, all of a sudden now becomes $50,000 a year, and I'm just making up as an example for that. We could possibly shave that number down a bit, but the problem is if we plan to buy, I think whatever the bus number is, and then we end up $5,000 short, then we're just playing the game in the middle of the year of crap, we planned on buying 3 and now we still got to find $5,000 or $10,000. We could shave it down a little bit, but the understanding that sometimes there might be, that issue of finding the money in the budget.
Tony.
Yeah.
Question. Is that the 3 vans that are in the capital plan every fall, or is that different?
Yeah, they're booked into
Okay.
here.
They're in the,
Is that part of this rolling
Yeah.
step? Okay, because
they're still technically
we're
capital.
finding that the amount isn't quite enough to cover 3
Which
vans
is-
anymore.
Why we're going
Yeah.
up 9%. I said we can drop
Yeah.
that a little bit, but I don't know to what,
We had to put in a little bit of extra money based on the fall capital to purchase all 3 vans.
Yeah.
So the money, it almost needs to have an increment of like 5% each year or 3% each year.
Right, to just keep pace. So we've got it going up 9. Again, we could drop it a little bit, but it still probably needs to go up 5 with the understanding that it's probably gonna be 5 every year just to keep pace. And we'll hit a point where prices flatline, but again, a couple of years of prices being like this because we're on contracts and the state's on contracts, then it spikes up. It takes time to sort of level out.
So what we're saying about this 9% increase is it is not, it's basically sort of level services, like the same number of vehicles as we've purchased in the past,
Yeah.
just increased expenses.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, we could shave it a little bit, but there's nothing significant there. Might be, you could probably shave 20 or 30 grand out of it. Liability insurance, we skate by every year by the skin of our teeth. We do the prepayment, which saves us 2%. We try to max out our Maya credits, which Mike Rosen works on. That saves us another 30 or 40 grand. If we do get dividends from Maya, that helps offset what our actual bill is. But we're coming in with, $48 left at the end of the year. So that 1% is sort of just keeping pace with our portfolio change, if you will, but that's kind of maxed out. As for the transfers, the only ones you could the reserve fund we know we need to do. We probably don't want to move back on compensated absences because we don't want to drain that fund. Now the transfer to stabilization and OPEB, we do have stabilization at a decent level where it's generating enough interest, so we could have that discussion. The transfer to OPEB, we do transfer what's left of the health insurance budget generally to OPEB. That's always a discussion that, do we want to continue to do that, but everything comes at a cost.
Right.
And I want to, I think a theme for as we look through budgets and everything is we want to make sure anything we're reducing isn't necessarily something that's just going to find its way into an override in a couple of years. Not to say that we wouldn't make a conscious decision when we get there that we think X or Y is important and that should be part of it, but not to say let's just cut this out and then in a couple of years, well, it has to be part of an override, because I think that, rightly so, will rile the taxpayers. But stabilization's at a fair point. Interest is fair. That's a possibility. Again, you might be able to shave $200,000-300,000 grand out of that to drop the number, but we'd be going from 8.5 to 8.3. So I think there's nothing significant there.
And again, if you drop that, you do want to clearly message that to the rating agencies as well, because that's stuff that they want to
That's
see.
kind
on
of a
an
red
annual
flag
basis.
kind of
Yeah.
thing for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As long as there's a clear message and saying, this is why we're doing it, and this is how we plan to correct that going forward.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think the FinCom is gonna look to make some additions to some of our stabilization funds because of the free cash we have available. We probably go over that a little bit more later, but, it's something we feel really strongly about, And I think what we saw, which happened recently with with this building, I think reflects even more, why we feel some money should be put into some type of fund in the future to pay for capital expenses. But again, we could go over that
Yeah, and
later.
again, this is just the regular general fund contribution to
Yeah.
the budget.
Right.
Some of you will remember umpteen years ago, we took money out of stabilization to fund a portion of the DPW building. And then the promise was we would pay back a certain amount every year until we paid that amount back. We did, and then we dropped this number. It was around 400 and something thousand in the budget up until a couple of years. Then we still wanted to make sure we were throwing something in there. But it's worth discussing, because again, at the time when we even did that, we were looking at the practically 0% interest. Now, with interest rates up a bit, the $8-9 million in stabilization at least generates enough interest that it's keeping pace with inflation.
Yeah,
Right.
there was a memo of understanding between the selectmen and the FinCom, on that. And I think it was important, because Jeff always does. The rating agencies to know why we took money out of stabilization. This is the reason, but this is our plan to bring it back.
All right, are there any questions or recommendations regarding our shared cost budget? I think,
They're gonna do anything with most of the numbers that I heard Ms. Mizuko mention are kinda small and probably not worth taking the risk of adjusting them, because if you're wrong, you only need them in there anyhow, and if they're right, they become free cash next year. But 300, 350 on the Blue Hills is a good number.
Yeah.
yeah.
What are we looking to do with that?
Well, I think that's the number you see down here, that 8.5 million includes that Blue Hill of free cash needed to balance the budget. That includes that reduction of free to Blue
Oh,
Hills.
okay, you've already-
That was originally, I think, a little over 9 million.
Yeah, you'll see the regional schools is 2,150,000 now, so that's down year over year. We had programmed a 7% increase prior
Right.
to that.
And that's just based on enrollment, right?
A shift, yeah, I think our number was flat, but other towns went up relative, so that could always bounce back, and next year we could be looking at a $400,000 increase.
Right.
We'll take it.
I've seen a lot of Snapchat stories in the last 2 weeks for acceptances, so I'm just saying.
We'll take one win for a year. It's gonna be something positive, this budget.
Let's hope that there isn't another 10% increase in health insurance next year, right? So
Well, at that point, we will just run our own hospital, because it's,
I mean, I think, but to Alan's point earlier, just taking into account that and pensions, I mean, we're already behind the 8 ball.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you look at these numbers, we have our property tax revenue going up by like $3.3 million. And we have pensions and health insurance collectively going up by about $3 million. So that doesn't give you any increase in the operating budget. And then when you look at the non-property tax revenues, it's nice. We've projected a local receipts increase of 12.11% because we had revisited those numbers and looked at how can we estimate that and, make sure that we're doing reasonable projections. And some of it was also that there had been a little bit of an artifact in there from the COVID years that, the meals and rooms tax and stuff like that was
we were cautious at building those back
depressed
up,
because
yeah.
of right. So it's nice to see that number coming up, but if this is last year we put in a little over $5.1 million in the override stabilization and free cash. So, but without having that this year, that represents 3.2% of last year's revenue, which wasn't really revenue at all, right? It was, so we've kind of, if we don't put in free cash, which obviously would be the goal, is to not have to do that, then that sets us back 3.2% just from
Just
the
to start
get-go.
off with,
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick question on state aid. Does that include, somewhere I assume it includes in here, the offsets? The offsets to state aid?
Yes.
Okay.
So everything's included in there.
Good,
yes.
okay.
Okay. So we're looking at a total revenue increase of 1% over last year because this first projection is not showing any contribution from free cash or any one-time monies. If we were to repeat the same amount of one-time monies as we did last year, we'd be more in the neighborhood of like 4.2% increase. But then when we're looking, the first requests we were looking at from general government were 5.4% increase, schools 8.1% increase, and facilities 5.4% increase. So if we were to stick with those numbers, that would require more than $8.5 million of one-time monies to balance the budget. And so we as a group had said we wanted to have more of a discussion and to have everybody kind of do a pencil sharpening exercise before we made any votes on those numbers. So perhaps we should go through each of these, have a little bit of a discussion of each of these budgets. General government, we're looking at 5.4% here. I don't know if that was the number that we were looking at last time.
So, I think it probably was maybe a hair higher.
Here, it's like 5.5, I think is the last one, so.
We last year,
down a little bit.
we last year had projected 6%. We've been able to kind of drive it down to 5.4. And then we looked at the framework you mentioned. I'll have Jeff take you through this sheet about the sort of non-contractual obligations, understanding that some of the, a contractual obligation like Munis, well, the software goes up $25,000. That's, we don't really have a choice in that. But Jeff, do you want to take everyone through?
Yeah, let me just try to get it up on the screen so we have it. One second.
And as he brings it up, some of the expense increases, not a significant amount, but they're offset by revenues because they're the cost of collecting a revenue. When we look at treasurer's office receipts, and then some of the pool stuff, it's like the cost goes up, but we'll collect. We'll have another pool open, so it's a little complicated. If people would just pay $50,000 a year for a pool pass, we'd be good. Yeah, totally reasonable.
This
For one
is,
pool.
this
Now I'm
is,
sure how to bring,
this is Norwood, Tom.
I was gonna say, I don't know when you
not,
thought we went to Weston.
not Beverly Hills, so, Tony.
What comes with that $50,000 pool pass? Is there like
Unlimited pina coladas.
Right.
Free towels.
I want a walk-up bar and a cabana boy.
Yeah.
For that kind of price, I'll get you that if it would work. Maybe that's the thing. Instead of cutting, we got to go premium.
Don't do entire screen, I think, right? Do window. Or tab, yeah. Window. Yeah. That's it, then share. There you go. That's it. Then you go to your window where you have it.
Are you here or there?
I'm both. I'm just in case I want to present something in my head. I'm just ready to go.
that's on there?
Yep.
So that's being presented?
Yep.
Okay.
Omnipresent.
So on the sheet that you handed out, it's on the screen, this is the general fund expenditures. So this is, and it's ranked in order of year-over-year change. So you'll see, I'll scroll through it fairly quickly, but on the bottom, we're up 4.7% on our expenses, $429,928. In the middle of the page are kind of our summary of expenses that are actually requiring an increase. So these are contractual, or as Tony mentioned, the treasurer expenses. So postage and ambulance fee collection. So we have a ambulance billing that is historically under budgeted, but it's one of those line items that if the expense is higher than budget, it's good news because you're bringing in more revenue. But I think we need to make an adjustment because even with DOR, we're showing a line that's consistently overspent. We need to make that adjustment. That should be that X percentage of the ambulance revenues going forward. So that still needs to be increased in this budget in my mind, but we can talk about that going forward. IT, again, Munis software licenses, that's $67,000. Fire, they have some medical supplies and a new subscription that they have to pay for. Waste collection, that's the landfill. Some testing that's being done over there. Waste removal is trash, we all know about that, we've heard about that for years. Recreation, again, we're predicting or projecting that the second pool is open. Again, this will be partially offset by fees. We can do the analysis to see exactly what that is, but again, that's $22,000 of that. And then just added in from the last time you saw this, just the FinCom, that's our audit contract. It's $6,990 higher than prior years. So if you take all those in, of our expenses on the general government, 87% are basically required. There's not really much we can do on those. So it gives us a flexibility of $57,285. So again, I think, Mr. Mizuko mentioned it last night, but it would be, death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you wanted to try to cut some of that out, and it doesn't make a material impact in the grand scheme of things. Just the other's capital that we've already talked about, we have reduced that, again, highway maintenance, that's to try to get that, the budget down to 5.4%.
This is really helpful to look at expenses, obviously the larger expenses, salaries. When we're looking at salaries, some of it is just same positions, the contractual increases. But there were some either ARPA or other grant-funded positions that are now being added into the budget.
Yeah, there was offsetting some positions. So parts of them were mostly in the health department and then a little bit in the health department. So there was nothing 100%, it was just offsetting
Okay.
a portion of a couple of salaries.
The Council on Aging and Health Department.
Also,
Yeah, and we did, to keep the head count the same, because again, with the health department, the positions had always been booked, but we paid a portion of them with ARPA, because we're able to, the health department, the Council on Aging, we're actually eliminating a position in the rec department that's vacant and sort of moving it over, if you will, not that it really moves over, so the head count is flat overall for absorbing grant increases.
Okay. Are there, I know when, there was a time that we added some positions because we suddenly had additional monies. Are there things that we should consider whether or not we want to pay for them long-term? And what I'm wondering is, is there something that we maybe want to say, like, well, we've got a lot of free cash right now, we could certainly fund this for some of these items 1 year out of free cash as a special town meeting warrant or something like that, but maybe not commit to putting them in the baseline and keeping them there for the foreseeable future necessarily.
I think that will come with certain positions. With the health department, it's a portion of the nurse and the second inspector and the ACO position. So those are sort of needed positions in the health department. On the senior center side, we sort of made that adjustment with rec that we, as we've grown the part-time pool for transportation, there's a call it half social worker, half transportation coordinator position that's been ARPA funded. Because that was mostly ARPA funded, that's now being put into the budget. We chose to eliminate that rec position to just keep the head count neutral. That's not to say there's still a handful of positions that are funded by different federal or state grant sources. Not many, there's maybe 2 or 3 left. When those come up, that might be the discussion about, let's give it a 3-year run out, or let's give it a 1-year run out.
Mm-hmm. Do any of those positions have any revenue associated with them?
Well, it depends on how you want to look at it. So you take the senior center, not directly, but as an operation, there's a lot of grant money that they bring in for other items. They get $11 per senior in town or something like that, and they get donations. So directly knowing those ones on the health department side, I mean, I don't want to call a fee revenue. I don't want to say if we are less available, we're taking in less fees. Nothing significant, but they're not revenue generating positions.
I just wasn't sure how the Council on Aging vans and stuff worked. Or is there any revenue associated with those? Like,
Directly, no.
we charge students bus fees, wondering, do the seniors contribute anything for their transportation then?
Not directly, no.
All right, well, I mean, Tony, looking at your numbers from FY '25 to FY '26, if you go with an FY $25 budget of $41,059,412. If you include the salary increase as $1,939,551, then you add the increase related to the trash, which is $188,426. That gives you a number of $43,187,399, okay? So the way I look at it, you're probably, $90,000 off plus or minus. And that's what we'd ask you to try to reduce.
Yeah, so again, when you start looking at some of those other contractual obligations, it's the software that we use to do our accounting. So it's a contractual cost, and then
Yeah.
some of them are revenue generators that end up becoming a shared revenue.
Yeah.
So I mean, in a perfect
Yeah.
world, the cost of running the ambulance service would get first paid out of those revenues, but we
Yeah.
take a shared cost on
Right.
100, or shared revenue on 100% of it,
Mhm.
but there's a $120,000 line that we have to spend to do it. So we're sort of saying, cut other services to pay for this revenue that then goes in different
Well,
places.
I get that, but again, budget balancing, either for the general government of the schools, we don't tell you where to cut. We just say, here's your number. You work out where you can go. And, there are ways, I think, in this budget to come up with that number relatively easily, without having to make major reductions in service.
What was your number
Could you
again?
repeat that number?
The number I got, this is taking last year's budget number, adding the salaries, and then adding the trash. I get a number of $43,187,399.
So we're roughly 100 grand off.
Yeah.
On the 5.4%.
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
And what percentage increase would that give us?
That would give you a 5.18% increase.
Okay.
Ish.
So whether you want to, reduce, expenses, whether you want to take some money out of road work, whether you want to, whether you want to personally take a pay cut. However you do it, again, it's not our role to tell you how to do it, it's just that here's the number.
I think if there's any questions specifically about general government, we can address them now, but also, as Alan pointed out, our role as a budget balancing committee is to discuss how do we divvy up this pot, not how is each pot spent. So, if there's no other questions about that, perhaps we can move on and talk a little bit about schools.
Sure, because I really like to focus on Tony here for a little while.
We're coming back to him, don't you worry.
Your time will come.
All right. The schools like to talk about where things, we had left with suggesting that we would like to see, the schools to look at what would it take to reduce the budget by about $1.2 million.
I will share the school committee met last night, had a conversation about possible reductions. We did some tiered reductions and did a lot of work with different departments, different folks to try to sharpen the pencil, so to speak. We had put 2 tiers together, and what that includes is the reduction of a significant amount of technology, 5 positions from the budget, to reduce our ask for the Coakley position. So it's not reducing any of the middle school positions we've asked for, but it's going through the current positions that we have and looking at different avenues to reduce them. So there are 5 from the first one.
So it's essentially what you've been trying to interrupt, but essentially what you're saying is a wash. You'd rather have the positions at the Coakley consistent with the plan that you had, and you find that there's other positions in the district you feel that you could eliminate or
Shift.
modify, or
Shift.
shift. That's
I
probably
mean, we
shift.
do have roughly 250 students who are
Yeah.
shifting from one level to another.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
Yeah.
that makes sense, that
Understand.
budget might move with
Yeah.
them.
And we
Understood.
always had that as part of the plan.
Of
And
course.
these were
Yeah.
just 5 that Tim and the
Okay.
team were able to find. But
Understood, thank
Yep.
you.
And all of the improvement positions that were asked for
Yeah.
from our staff, I assume those are necessary, and I believe they're necessary for our school. So those aren't going away, but
Okay.
we found other positions within
Okay.
the budget that we felt like we could
Good.
possibly reduce. We reduced some curriculum refresh money. May have to shift some of that to the following fiscal year. For example, when we do an ELA refresh, if we were to do an ELA refresh, it costs about $350,000. We won't make that decision until the end of the fiscal year. So we won't know that yet, but if we end up doing ELA, then we'll have to use 100,000 from the next fiscal years, so we kind of shifted that way. We took a significant amount of money out of professional development and materials, of about $80,000. Right now, we've targeted about 200,000 for turnover savings. That could shift. We won't know that until a little while longer. And building material requests of about 20,000. So that's $828,000 right there that we feel not great about. It's actually the shifts that we're talking about, and I provided some more detail last night at school committee, and I won't go into that right now. But it will hurt some folks and hurt some services, but we're trying to do it in a way that actually improves, but also provides some change to the district.
Can I
Shoot.
interrupt just a, so the number we had looked at previously was an 8.1% increase. If you were to reduce your ask by the 828,
Yeah.
it's kind of small.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. But by that number, what percentage?
We think we're down to like 6.75.
That gets it to 6.75.
Thank you. That's,
Yep. The tier 2 reductions are a little more problematic, and I will say the school committee, and you guys can share this, didn't feel comfortable getting into tier 2. Those are reductions in proposed department chairs, kind of the coordination for curriculum that we're looking at for the middle school. It also reduces an elementary position that we will likely ask back in the year following as we move into the redistricting and restructuring. It reduces a high school position, which would either be an ELA or science position, we're not sure yet. And then transportation salary increases for our drivers who are paid minimal money right now, and we can't get them or keep them, and we have a lot of incredible people that are driving that we want to keep too. So that's another $482,200 for a total of 1.3 million or so. Tier 2 is really hard. I will share that. So school committee, in a kind of a straw vote, I guess, last night, and agree shared that tier 1 reductions we feel like we can do. Tier 2 would be more difficult.
Yep. And I'll mention, like, just as a color on the transportation salary increase, that was obviously for retention and recruitment, because we're having a hard time with getting people in. And on the flip side of that, when we don't have good drivers who are getting paid well, we end up paying twice as much in contractual costs.
yeah, that's
because
one
we
of
have the
those
contract.
penny wise, pound foolish
Yep,
things.
so that was
yes.
one of the ones we really didn't want to cut off of there. The middle school, department chair, that was around, we're opening the middle school. We don't want to be shortchanging the curriculum at the middle school, especially where they will be a separate building with now 4 grades that has as many kids as the high school, as many kids as, they'll be pretty equal in their student enrollment. And then obviously, as Tim said, for the elementary position, we're just gonna come back and need it again anyway. So it just seems kind of silly to do that. So the committee, less a straw vote, and actually it was actually a motion.
It was a motion. It was a motion. My apologies.
The committee as a whole really is, has instructed us to really fight for not having to hit into those tier 2 things, but those are the next things that we have on the docket.
Well, I think my personal opinion is I look at, I want to thank all of you for doing this, because I think that, like, that was kind of the spirit of what we were looking for, is like, let's dig in a little deeper and see what we can do. And so I think I appreciate that effort. So now that doesn't mean that we're necessarily there yet, right? But that is encouraging to think, like, okay, well, if we could reduce this, the budget we have before us is looking for a little over $8.5 million in free cash, so that would reduce us to below $8 million in free cash, going in the right direction. That would be encouraging. Any discussion on the school part?
It's, I suppose, on the technicality, it's none of my business, and if you said it, I'm sorry I missed it. On your tier 2, transportation salary increases, basically cutting that. How are you doing now? Are those contracts?
It would be cutting the amount we want to increase.
We're trying to increase our driver wages. We need to increase them pretty aggressively, so we put like a 20% increase, which would be, our budget had about a 400.
But today, it's not a an obligation, you don't have the contract settled or not.
It's not a
is no
contract, it's
contract.
just the wages we offer our drivers, and we're not being
Especially
competitive.
drivers, you should.
Okay.
But
They're
we
not
put in,
unionized.
Yeah, okay, I got
we
it.
put in an increase of close to 400,000, and we were thinking we could do less of an increase next year and then build up a more, somewhat more modestly increase
2%
over
a year
3
instead of
years.
5%
Well, it'd
a
be
year,
more like
whatever,
10%,
yeah.
maybe 10% over 3 years.
Yeah, we still feel it's important to give
But-
some increase so that we're not
Yeah.
ending up having to pay those contracts to get contract drivers, which end up being
Yeah,
2, 3
much.
times as much,
And we've
more than that.
And we've compared ourselves to some of the other districts, and we're very low. So
That-
ideally, we'd stay with, we wouldn't have to take it down
Mm-hmm.
by the 200,000. We'd stay at the original increase. We aren't really competitive right now.
That was gonna be my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, in this
Comps,
case,
it's incredibly low.
yeah, and in this case, it's, one of those where we don't like to compare ourselves to our surrounding towns because we're not the same,
Yeah, but it just makes sense
demographic.
if a driver's
But
looking for a job.
if they can,
They
Right.
can go one town
They can go
over.
one
They
town
would
over,
go
Get
one-
$5 more
exactly.
bucks an hour.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it is important to remember, minimum wage is 15 or 15.50, and, Dunkin' Donuts pays 18 or 19 bucks an hour,
Yep.
and,
$20 is 22.
yeah, we're paying drivers 20 bucks an hour.
Do you feel like going from the 400,000 to the 200,000, is that a big hit in terms of competitiveness, would you think?
Well, we wouldn't be able to get to where we really feel like we'll need to get. So it would be, instead of, if we can do the 400,000, that would have been like a 20% increase
Yeah.
to bring us up to our comps. If we only can do half of that, it would be like a 10%. We'd still be below. Then we'd have to do a 10% the next year. We'd have to be.
Yeah.
You could still go
More-
next door and get.
But it will set us back in the next year in that we're still gonna be, school committee
Asking
wasn't
for it
comfortable
again.
with it yet, because it will mean more contracted out, and it definitely puts a strain on the transportation.
This has been an ongoing issue, for
Right.
many years. and
Many.
Are you having
Yeah.
trouble getting drivers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why you have all these contracts you're talking about.
Yep. That's why,
Yeah.
do you remember, I think, was it last year or the year before, we ended up, and it was obviously COVID as well, but we needed to come and get a warrant article for
Yeah.
the transportation because of the vans, because we couldn't get the stupid vans in with the chip problem, that nobody could get vans and Amazon bought them all.
Right.
But part of that also is the drivers, that the length of their trips, and, a lot of these guys are retirees, I'm sure there's gals too, but, yeah, to get somebody to drive up to the North Shore.
It's different than like the senior medical transport
Right.
program where you're putting one person in a car and you're driving them to the neighboring town and then back in 40 minutes. It's different when you're driving an hour and a half up 95.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I can't read that. What's the number in the tier one?
Tier 1 is 828,697.
828,697, okay, all right.
Which brings us to about a 6.75% increase instead of the 8.1.
Okay.
Which puts us more in line with the other numbers up here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you do realize a lot of other communities, all communities are different, I get that, have much lower increases, because, again, what I'm looking at is, I look at things long-term, okay? And at some point, we're gonna have to sell the voters on a tax increase. And, they're gonna look at some of these numbers. I mean, I've had people come to me and say, both the general government and schools live within their means. I've had other people, good town meeting members, always support the schools, say 8.1, that's just too much, and, they wanna see some type of relief, so. That's pretty much where I'm coming from.
I will say 6.75, when you're opening a new middle school, you're going to see a higher increase typically than you would
Mhm.
at another town, right? Medway, for example, is 8.1, 8.2 right now going in. A lot of the other surrounding districts are right now 3.5 to 4. We're adding a school and staff and those kind of things.
And
so-
the buses for
And the
that.
buses,
And the bus,
right, and
yeah.
transportation contract.
It is worth noting that last year when we looked at the budget, we figured we probably need 6% on the general government side and about 8% on the school side. So that was, their projections a year ahead of time, but we didn't just pick those numbers out of the air and then make a budget meet it. We said, we knew what our contractual obligations would be. We projected 6 on the general government side. It came in at 5.4 is where we were able to drive it down to. Same thing on the school side. We knew, I think those Coakley positions were baked into that number. I forget what we baked into that number, but we sort of said this is probably where it is. Best case scenario, so both numbers can be a little bit down for that. I don't think we'll see the same, I can't speak for health insurance, but the same operating increases the following fiscal year. I think, on the general government side, we're 5 or sub 5. So I assume the school number is probably not gonna be 7 or 8% again, it would be lower, it's not gonna be 2%, I don't want anyone to think that,
Unless you plan to let us open another school. That's-
But it'll be more aligned with these other towns.
It would be.
I think it's important to note too that, I've been here a long time too, and we've been behind the 8 ball for many, many, many years, and so there has been a lot of catching up, and unfortunately, it's exactly what we talked about with the drivers, teachers can go to the next town over too.
Sure.
And so we're finally having to, it's coming home to roost that the teachers are and staff in general want to get paid what the surrounding towns are getting, and because we've been behind it for so long that it feels worse because of it feels like bigger steps. But it's finally coming to be more in line with what everybody else, and then the increases going forward would be more in line with what these other towns who are already there are doing.
Okay. Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. I know at the last meeting it was brought up, like the increases of some other communities, and Westwood in particular was brought up. So I looked into their budget, and they are only at a 3.52% increase. But if you dig into why that is, I mean, we've talked about this before, but they're an entirely different community than we are. They don't have the high needs population, but they also have not yet settled their union contracts. So that budget could go up. And additionally, through their building project, I believe it was elementary that they opened, that shifted their district, that has allowed them to reduce to elementary teachers. So, as always, there's a story behind the number in other budgets.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Canton's gonna be 5% this year without opening a school, for example, just as a next door town.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Good work, Teresa.
You just tell me what you want me to research, and I'll do it for you.
In terms of we have 3 major budget categories. We also have facilities. We don't have the director of facilities here, but he does report to you two, Mr. Mizuko and Mr. Leff. So curious, do we feel like there's a little bit of room in that budget as well?
If there is, there's fractions of a percent. Again, their contractual obligations with step and COLAs are probably coming in at roughly that 5 number. We have one final meeting before we can get out the facilities budget. Their operating costs, again, they're not adding anything that's not already there. So I still think we're looking at that 5.4 number, give or take a point or two once we settle out on all of the contractual obligations. But their step and COLA increases are probably around that 5, which is the bulk of their budget, 5.5. Gas is up. Electricity might be up a teeny bit. There's a couple of costs baked in for the Coakley. Nothing critical. We've already mostly baked in the staff costs to that budget, so it won't be absurd, but I don't think it's going to get much lower than that.
Did they include the additional janitors at the middle school?
That's already been booked into their budget because those
Okay.
folks are starting prior to
Okay.
the fiscal year.
All right.
Oh, okay.
That's good.
That is good. Yeah, it's going to be a very busy summer.
Yeah.
All right.
So if nothing else changed from the discussion we just had, we're talking about still using 7.6 in free cash, approximately.
About 7.7 in free cash. Can I make a suggestion? So I like round numbers. Why don't we try to get that down to about $7.5 million of free cash? Okay? So if Tony can reduce the town budget, the general government budget by $100,000, and the schools would be willing to make another $130,000 worth of cuts, or reductions in requests, I should say, we'll get to that number.
You're talking 130 beyond the tier 1 cuts?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And you're talking 100, we had a discussion, we had 100 earlier.
That's
So you're
the-
now
that's-
talking 2, or you're
That's,
talking 1?
that's the 100 we were previously talking about. Reasonable, unreasonable, are you serious, or what?
Teresa?
If I can clarify, Maya, you were mentioning a couple of minutes ago the projections, and that I know we talked about them at the end of January. Was additional work done, to projection numbers? Because at that January meeting, there was a question of should we look at these? Are these too conservative? Was more analysis done that I missed, or is the projection still the same from that January meeting?
I thought at our last meeting, we had all collectively agreed that we were comfortable with the local receipts numbers.
Yeah, state aid had been put in, but the local receipts numbers nothing has shown us in the last 30 days that any of them are going anywhere different.
I mean, FinCom has been looking at this pretty closely, and we've been, getting quarterly reports. I know the Board of Selectmen got a quarterly report last night. I don't know if it included local receipts, but definitely the FinCom has been looking at local receipts. They are, there's some things that are trending a little bit above what we budgeted, but there's things that are trending below. Like building permits are actually below, are not yet at 50%. And so I don't think that there's much that could be, it didn't seem like there was much to discuss there in terms of our 1 year thing. Now, it is true that we budget somewhat conservatively, that we budget for roughly 90% of what we expect so that we don't get in trouble. But local receipts are around $15 million. So it's not like we're looking at our $161 million in revenue and saying we're projecting 90% of that. We're taking 10% of the budget and we're projecting 90% of that. So there's like 1%, like maybe kind of wiggle room there. The free cash it comes from both revenues that exceed our expectations and budget numbers that come in under budget. And generally that's on either the shared cost or the general government or facility side, because schools have the bottom line flexibility, so that money tends to move around, which makes sense. So, I think every year FinCom has looked closely at where are these free cash numbers coming from, like values coming from. The ultimate certified amount of $29 million last year was not known by FinCom, but certainly the fact that it was going to be more than $20 million, we knew a year ago. That wasn't a surprise. It was something that we had been talking about, and it was due to, as we went through at town meeting, a few big ticket items: the FM Global building permit, the hospital building permit, ironically.
We got
Over $3 million worth.
That was a miracle we got it.
It was, and a couple of other big ticket items that came in. The interest income. And we did, interest income is something that we did bump up significantly in our local receipts estimate.
That was the majority of the increase.
Yeah, right, because in the past we had been predicting I want to say it was around 150,000 and we went up to over $1 million.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
$1.5 million.
$1.5 million, thank you. So, I think, I know Jeff had kind of gone through that pencil sharpening exercise on the revenue side to see what we could anticipate, because it's absolutely true that it doesn't benefit anyone to intentionally underpredict revenues and then try to squeeze the budget. That's not the goal. But on the flip side, some of these revenue numbers are unpredictable. It depends on interest rates. It depends on how many people come to town and rent hotel rooms, but especially building permits.
And we talked about that a little bit last night.
And ambulance receipts is another one. I think that's down a little bit.
But we're not expecting any big building projects in the next fiscal year.
No.
No, I mean,
Nothing significant.
And not consistent. I mean, that's what the challenge has always been. We got to look at what we're sort of doing on average for building permits. So even if you get that one big project, we can't guarantee we're always going to get that $1 million or $2 million project. So, and again, let's face it, the big projects between Moderna and the hospital and FM, they're coming to an end. So that gravy train has sort of ended, and it's the regular churn of building permits. Ambulance receipts are up actually, but they're kind of starting to plateau. I mean, run numbers are up, but we've also been increasing ambulance rates every single year.
Yeah.
I think in the last 5 years, we've done it for the last 5 years, but there's only so much we can get because that's only on the 20% that's private pay anyway. But we're consistently sort of trying to bump that up with everything. And excise tax is a big revenue. Remember, that's probably a third of those local receipts, but that can swing 10 to 15% in a year. Whereas meals tax is generally not going to swing, but it's less than $1 million. I think that's not going to swing 10% in a year generally, other than a year like COVID. But excise tax can swing $500,700,000 a year.
Teresa?
Yeah, thank you for all those explanations. The reason I'm asking is because there was a school committee vote last night that if coming out of this meeting, there was going to be a request to cut anything beyond Act 828 and Tier 1. The majority of the school committee voted that they were cutting further, unless we had reassurance that the projections were reassessed and that we felt they were not too conservative, and that we wouldn't, a year from now, be looking at a huge whirlwind of free cash again. So I don't know. I know you can't promise that, but I don't know if this is a great request or not, Maya. But wanting to keep this moving along, and we're now going to be in March, and a lot has to happen in March. I don't know if it is, and I did not talk to Tim or Anne Marie about this, so sorry if I'm stepping out of line here, not talking to my chair and superintendent. But I wonder if Maya, if you, as chair of BBC and chair of the Finance Commission, could write a short memo to the school committee on this topic. I think it might be helpful for our colleagues. And then it also just helps make sure the information is, fully accurate. Anne Marie and I do our best to report back, but I don't have the handle on this that I know you do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think FinCom is meeting again next week. So I think that I am happy to, I guess maybe, when does school committee meet again?
March 5th.
So we meet the 5th,
Next
and then
Wednesday.
the 12th, and then the 26th.
Okay, so,
19th.
Or, sorry, 19th.
But the
Okay, so-
19th is our budget hearing, so we
All right.
definitely want to be done by then.
okay, so it wouldn't have time to go through FinCom, I guess, but I'm comfortable doing that, it'll just be factual, and a lot of it would be related to, some of the conversation was already had, but I do understand that it's hard to keep track of all the meetings that are going on, and so I'm interested in contributing to better communication, so I'm happy to do that. I will not promise that there won't be free cash, because I hope there will be, right? But I'm not. I hope that there will be free cash, because I hope that there will be some pleasant surprises. But I do not recommend that we engage in some effort to sort of generate free cash on purpose, that we're trying to under budget.
No, I think just to back up what Teresa was saying, it was just more of we see free cash, like a pretty decent amount each year. We have, like,
2 years
recently.
out of 10, though. That's the thing.
Right.
It's 2 out of 10.
But it was a
so-
legitimate question from those who
Sure.
are not, like, in the budget meetings on our committee to be like, well, is this going to keep happening, and are we being asked to cut money, and then we're just going to be flooding free cash next year again? Like, so I think that was a legitimate question.
And not to mention, even if we did, not that we are, but next year we're going to need $8 to $10 million in free cash again. So
Right. No, absolutely.
I hope
absolutely.
I'm wrong and we have $27
I think
million
this
in
is-
free cash.
I think
and
this
then we've got
overall
next
is a good
year's-
exercise in general, just to make sure that we're all being, fiscally responsible is part of our job, as elected officials in this capacity. Like, I understand that.
Also,
But delivering the services is too.
It's
So
important to know, we didn't factor in this year because obviously it's a lean year, so we wanted to be as, I won't say aggressive, but as conservative
Yep.
as possible. But it's also, you gotta remember that in a good AAA rated community, 3 to 5% annually is kind of turned back or given as a free cash. So you always wanna have that in there, that's gonna allow you to do some of those capital projects. So although we didn't plan for that this year, the hope is, yes, we'll have some. But again, the rating agencies, we're AA+, so we're right there. If 3% is the end goal, that'd be fantastic. But, you're looking at the AAAs are 3 to 5% consistently
Of using free cash.
of free cash generated.
Yeah.
generating,
Of the total budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill?
Yeah, I've been hopping on the free cash over and over. And I hate to see us spending free cash, but we've done a good job from where we started.
Yes.
But it's still using 7.7 million in free cash. And I actually saw something in the newspaper from a school committee meeting, and one of the members, and it probably represents the whole committee's feeling, or a number of the committee's feelings, that it feels like we're always told to cut, but then there's always this free cash hanging out there. As we've just been discussing, there isn't always this free cash. This is an anomaly. Normally, we're lucky on 10-year average, we're lucky if we have $5 million a year. School budget alone this year went up, before we made these cuts, the original last year, $5 million. Never mind anything else, anywhere else, and that's spending every penny of the free cash it generated. And actually, Jeff just gave the 3 to 5 number, but the Financial Management Resource Bureau recommends that it should be between 5 and 7%, which would be, what, 9 to 13 million somewhere, say $10 million here in Norwood. And at best, we've been generating an average of 5. So there isn't all this money out there that somebody seems to think there is, just because we had a couple of years anomaly with these building permits and so forth. The next statement made by the same individual, or attributed to the same individual, I totally agree with. I'd like to know what the plan is for long-term use of this going forward in a fiscally responsible way. Just spending it each year, I don't think is fiscally responsible. So that's just getting it off my chest there. But, you know, they also predict, like we just said, we should be generating a financially healthy town is going to be generating that 5 to 7%, and we're not getting that, you know? So we've got problems, and we shouldn't be ignoring it just by throwing some free cash that happens to be around at our problem. Thank you.
I want to say I really appreciate your comments about like long-term planning, and that's our next item on the agenda. So I want to get back to that in a moment, but let's try and get to some target numbers. I like Alan's suggestion of, you know, 7.5 million. It's still a pretty big number, right? It's still more one-time money than we put in last year. And we would still be then needing, you know, if we were to do kind of some average projections, we'd be looking at probably like $9 million next year. So still a high number. So I think we're looking at like another $230,000 in cuts. I see where Alan was going with the 100 and 130. I'm not sure that's necessarily the way to do it, because the schools have already done a pretty significant reduction, and facilities hasn't been reduced at all. I wonder if it might make sense to do 100 from the general government, 100 additional from the schools, and 30 from facilities. Because we haven't gone through that pencil sharpening exercise in facilities. I know that one of the things that the schools had, you know, said was that some of that, like, you aren't calling it, is it turnover money? Is that what you're calling what we used to call hire down money?
Apologies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come from different places. Call it different
And
things.
so I don't know if there's maybe a little bit more wiggle room in that number that might help some, you know, make some adjustments without necessarily really getting into that tier 2. So I'm just throwing that out
So
there
can
as
you
part
give-
of our
can you
discussion.
give us that again? From today's numbers, you want general government to come another 100,000?
Yes. Schools to come another 100,000
It would
and,
just be, that's 100,000 on top of their tier 1 reductions.
Yes.
yes,
Just so we're,
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And then 30 out of
30 out
shared
of
costs?
facilities.
out of facilities.
rather reduce shared costs than facilities, but I'm sure we could find it if we had to.
I mean, if we agree to those numbers, I mean, we're there, pretty much.
If we look at, I mean, what is that, I don't know what that number is, but like 30,000 divided by 8861, that would be, it would still be more than a 5% increase in facilities.
Right, it's not, don't get me wrong, it's not significant. I'd rather reduce it somewhere else, but if that makes everyone happy and that's what we want to see, then we'll
Yeah, I
find a way
think
to make
it's
it
more
happen.
the number cut of facilities are our buildings, everything we need, both general government and schools. We don't wanna,
Yeah, that's why I'd rather, honestly, if that's where everyone wants to go, that's fine. I'd rather cut, what we're putting into OPEB and stabilization by 25 grand each and leave facilities where it is. This has been a particularly tough year. We've got the Coakley opening next year,
well,
but
you mentioned
either
a
way.
couple other numbers, and I said they're small enough to be behind, but they made up 30,000,
Yeah.
more than 30,000.
I think
So,
it's always one, like OPEB is one that you can probably cut, because again, we have a funding plan for that. It's, if there's excess in health insurance, that's
Right.
going in there. So you have a plan there. The 125 doesn't make a dent in that on an annual basis, so
Right.
you can cut that, but you still have a plan. So that's probably not a bad way to put it.
I was throwing this out here as, room for discussion, so I'm definitely
How about this?
want
We
this.
eliminate the OPEB contribution, leave facilities where it is, and that drops us to like 7.4 million. We're even beating Alan's number.
Teresa.
And we don't have to touch?
Listen, no. And everything else. I'm trying to
Oh, I
keep
thought you were
this-
giving me on.
Give me 5% of it.
Teresa?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. As I'm just thinking about taking this back to the school committee, and additionally, we have a subcommittee meeting on Friday that we can dive into things more on our end. The school committee was pretty strongly against tier 2 reductions last night, so trying to brainstorm. And something that we've not yet really talked about as a school committee was a tier 3, which is increasing fees. And 2 school committee meetings ago, we did with Mr. Mannion review our revolving funds and the fees like we usually do, and there was some discussion of should some things go up or not, and right now the school committee is not comfortable with that either. But I did want to ask this group, are fee increases looked at on the town side?
Yes, we raise fees every year. So ambulance fees have gone up 4 of the last 5 years, and again, that's a shared revenue. We've raised cemetery fees 2 of the last 5 years. We raise rec fees usually every year, splitting between camp some year, pool the following year, general rec programming every year. We jacked up the town clerk fees last year. We jacked up the sealer, voids and measures fees last year. Our building permit cost is actually higher than most towns. As it is, that would, when Avalon came in, we made a change that made another 30 or 40 grand. So candidly, we're jacking up every fee we can charge every year. Everything pretty much goes up each year. And if we don't, it's every 3rd year something's going up.
Well, let me confuse people and throw something else out. One of the things the FinCom was thinking about doing with some of the free cash we had, as we said, was, put it to some of the reserve funds. We're thinking of putting some additional money into compensated absences. Okay? That being said, instead of putting $125,000 in the compensated absences from the budget directly, just to keep a line item in there, why don't we knock that down to 25,000?
If I could counter, that's a terrible idea, and we should get rid of the OPEB contribution. Because remember, to that point, OPEB has $4.5 million in it. That interest stays in that fund and generates in there. The compensated absences, we know we want to keep putting money into it. We put money into it, but remember, there's always a draw on compensated absences every year. The goal is to eventually try to get to that couple $100,000 number that we know we sort of pay. So I would leave compensated absences the way it is. If there's something we want to play with here, and maybe we split the savings between less free cash and throw a little bit of money to the school budget, is get rid of the transfer to OPEB. I mean, we're 100 years from solving OPEB.
Right.
We've made what progress we can make. We do transfer money into OPEB every year. This is a good to have, but just as we've made additional pension contributions, this isn't going to impact our credit rating because we're still putting money in there. If we eliminate the transfer to OPEB, because again, a couple $100 grand goes in there a year plus whatever the interest is.
Did you want to eliminate the whole item or just keep something in the budget just so
Keep
there's a
something
line?
in the
So
budget,
instead
yeah,
of
just
so
so
instead
we
of
have a plan.
125,
$1.
knock it down
Like
to
10,000,
25 or
so just so
something.
you have a plan.
Well, and we got to keep the line in there so we can make the transfer at the end of the year without having to move it. But so.
But doesn't the plan, you're talking OPEB,
Yeah.
doesn't the plan call for so much per year? As well as the,
The financial policies, No,
So we've never followed the financial policy in
Exactly.
OPEB, because every position we're supposed to add, we were supposed to add a cost, and it just was
Stayed the
very,
same.
it was very aspirational. But we've transferred money, as we do at the end of the year,
Yeah.
what's left in health insurance gets transferred to OPEB, because we never know exactly what that number's gonna be. So we throw a couple $100,000 into it every year. We've had some years it's been really low and it's been next to nothing. So there's money that goes in there, and remember, it's similar to a pension fund in that that it's, I think it's 4.2 million is what's in the OPEB fund. That money gets invested. It's invested long term, so we can take a loss on it, but it means we get better gains. That stays in there until such a time as it's fully funded in 2073 or something like that. So I just think that that's not hurting our financial position. It's not hurting us with the rating agencies. There's another dollar amount going in there. If you cut that by 120 grand and you say 30 grand of that is what was otherwise going to be a facilities cut, that gives us 90 grand. Go from 7.5 million to 7.45 for free cash, and that might get dropped lower, might go higher depending on some of these other ones go. And then the school cut would be $55,000 beyond your tier one instead of 100.
All right, so what are you talking about, Tony, in terms of overall costs? You're saying knock the OPEB down to what?
$5,000. Leave a line in there.
That's
so it's
120,
there.
so you're down to 110,000. So between you and the schools, you split, 55 grand.
Oh,
both
no,
of you.
I was planning to make the $100,000 reduction on the general government side anyway, rather than take 30 grand from facilities. Again, this building being an example of facilities is very conservative in how they manage things. They could probably be a little bit more, a little bit less conservative in fixing things, but we get nervous with the buildings we have. So that gives us that $120,000. Don't cut facilities, cut the overall amount of free cash by 50 grand, and instead of cutting 130 or 100 grand, you're now only having to go 55 beyond your tier one cuts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that'll work for me, I think. Having to see the numbers, but I think that makes sense.
So what was that one more time?
Question is, can you
55.
remember that
Just
one more time?
55.
That's the one you heard.
All right, yep.
You're
Your
gonna,
tier one
Tier
cuts
one
plus
plus.
$55,000
and what were you gonna do to the OPEB? You're taking it to
to $5,000. Because again, there is another funding source. We also don't want to cut things that are just going to end up in an override in 2 years. This one, I don't think would. If we're going to put anything in the override, it would be pension funding, because we got to get there before we get there for OPEB. We've done very good on OPEB. We've got millions of dollars in OPEB. We're going to continue to pay our retirees health care.
Yeah,
Yes.
And the pension funding schedule is it's 4% increase each year, so if you look at that number, 4% compounded year after year, that's gonna be a big number in a couple of years.
Yeah.
If we make that change to OPEB, the rating agencies won't go bonkers, will they?
No. Again, OPEB, I'll say it here, I think OPEB is the dumbest thing out there. I think it's something that actuaries came up with, and it's a great thing for them. They're telling us we have $150 million in exposure. It's never gonna come to fruition.
Well,
We
we're not
made-
Wellesley, but.
It is a financial success story. We, 10 years ago, had, I think, nothing in OPEB. We have a several $1 million on our balance sheet against our liability. We have made a lot of progress on it. It will continue to grow up until such time as we fully fund the pension, and then we would shift that money over. The pension fully funding is 2035 or 2040, so we're doing good. We can represent that we're doing well, and I think the rating agencies will understand
All
that.
right, so again, as I understand that OPEB goes down the what, 5 grand. Schools reduce 55. Town-
Beyond the tier
Right,
one.
beyond
Yeah,
tier
yes.
one.
Yep.
It reduces the rate of the increase, and the
Facility
town
stays-
reduces the rate of its increase by 100,000.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
facility stays the same. So that gets us to 7,450,000 in free cash.
Which is 707.45 million in free cash more than we'd like to spend, but we get it.
Yeah. All right.
I think that should be our work. We're done. Goes back to the school committee and the selectmen, whether they buy that or fight for something different. But that comes when they put together their budgets, when they come and meet with the FinCom and town meeting and so forth. But we always tend to be able to get together with this being the number. So presumably, we go from here, budget balancing's done, get back to each committee, go through get our budget books printed, have our public hearings, do everything we need to do, because time's running out here.
Yeah. So would you like to make the motion to?
I did.
Okay. All right. So Bill just made a motion.
We'll get the details out tomorrow of exactly what the motion
Yeah.
was.
All
but I
right.
think we
I
have
will,
a
I will
understanding.
second that.
All right, Alan is seconding it. Is everyone clear enough on the motion to make a vote?
Yep.
Okay,
You want
so
to
then
go?
I will, if there's no further discussion, then I'll put it to a vote. Teresa?
Yes.
Anne Marie?
Yes.
Yes.
Matt? Bill?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that's unanimous. All
Last
right.
year's vote wasn't unanimous, this one was.
All right, well, thank you everyone for this cooperative exercise. I think that is what serves the town best.
Yeah.
So-
Tim, can you send us a copy of your slide?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right.
$3.99.
The next item on the agenda is long-term financial planning. That's not truly the role of the Budget Balancing Committee, but something that FinCom has been talking a lot about is, you know, when we are making this commitment to support the budget with $7.5 million of free cash this year, what is that doing next year? We have this very large windfall of free cash this year. What can we do to set ourselves up well for things that we know are coming? And what are some of the things that we know are coming at us? We knew that a new middle school was coming this year. We know that at some point we're going to be hit with a big dispatch bill. That's going to be an ongoing expense. We know that there's, you know, some reconfiguration of the elementary schools, and that may have some expenses related to it. We know that there's a lot of capital projects that are coming. And as Alan alluded to, you know, we need office buildings that have HVAC. That, like, you know, we want the heat to work in February. So,
Got another sweater.
so, you know,
We want it to work, period. It's like it's working poorly, we want it to work better. It's like, we're functioning. I always tell people, I'm like, town hall's old, but it's in pretty good shape. We don't have days where it's kind of down, and then now it's like 2 or 3 days a year it's down.
yeah. So,
Can I offer a thought on that for moving us forward? And I may have to defer to Jeff for the rest of the meeting because I have to get to another meeting. But now that we have some numbers, let us update this, get it out to everyone, and then we can do sort of what we did last year, which is, without confusing everyone, create the 2-year look, and then we'll add years 3, 4, 5, just to see where we are, and we can start playing with one of those numbers. Again, health insurance at 10% versus 3% makes a significant difference in our projections, but that would give us the two, at least looking forward. So FY26 proposed moves over here, that's what we're doing, and then we would look at what will be 27, kind of have an idea of what that deficit is. And then I know there's been talk among different boards about capital in particular, but maybe we can pull some of the items from the capital plan that we think we know we're going to be doing, the ones like an ambulance or an engine that we have to buy. It's not like additional work that we might want to do, and get an idea of what that number would be for what we can reasonably guarantee we're going to have to do. Again, there might be a roof, we might say we need to do a roof, things like that get delayed, but I mean, we know that there's some things that will cease to exist if we don't replace them, and we need to do it. We can get that number and sort of use that as a framework to know what we're looking for. So not the whole capital plan, not capital outlay's job, but
No.
what do we know we're absolutely going to need to buy or pay for in the next couple of years? And then the only thing with that, we have a fair amount of free cash, but remember, it's 29 million.
Talking about
We
using
used
our
about
next-
9 million. We're going to use about 7.5 million now, so that drops it to 12.5. We're snow and ice. We're kind of there this year. We'll have to see what happens. There might be some other smaller articles, so let's call that another $1.5 million. I'm making that number up based on just making a number up. So all of a sudden, that 10 million left is a good number to end the year, but it's not, extravagant. But we can look at it in the context of next year's capital, just like we did this year. Do we think we can pay next year's capital? If we can, then all of a sudden it's, I think we can try to put that together in one piece of paper that looks sensible.
I think FinCom is really interested in looking at, should we be boosting some more of our reserves? Should we be building up our stabilization fund? We have met our financial policy. We're at the minimum. I think it's supposed to be at least 5% of operating expenses. We're 6 or 7%, but this may be an opportunity for us to make a good contribution to that in May. The compensated absences fund, we've established that it's now supporting both schools and general government. Is there something that we want to, put some more money into that? So that was something that the FinCom would like to be talking about. We would like input from the other major boards in the school committee, the Board of Selectmen, and possibly also Capital Outlay Committee. And we're just wanted to kind of talk about what's a reasonable mechanism to do that. That's not the role of this budget balancing committee, but we, as a FinCom, wanted to
It's a
kind
way
of
to
start
get
this.
everybody's input.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, another one we could look at is putting some additional money into a sped reserve fund, as an example.
Yeah.
Special ed stabilization, we'll be looking at that.
Yeah.
You know, and again, you know, I like to think long-term, and I know we have to do something with this building, you know, in the next few years. And who knows what the number is, but it's not gonna be pretty once we see it. And with all the free cash we have available, I wanna make sure we have some kind of mechanism that we can put some money aside to maybe be a down payment.
The only way you're
for
doing a
that.
project like that is to borrow.
That's huge.
Understand, but you know, sometimes if you put some money aside, doesn't make the borrowing as bad.
Yeah, but you're talking about putting money aside when you've got all these other projects you gotta do. So what are you gonna borrow for them? You know, it doesn't
Well,
make
you
any
know,
sense.
again, Bill, you know, when we have a number of, again, this isn't the place to debate it, but we have a number of necessary projects, you know, whether you spend 5 million in this or 5 million in that, I just wanna make sure we have the 5 million.
Well,
Okay.
let's get the list and everything so we can
Yeah.
intelligently talk about it. And numbers if
Yeah,
best we
and
can.
I have some ideas of how we could look at how we build up to funding a town hall project. So there's different models we can look at.
Yeah,
I think, roofs are another thing. We've done a roof study. We know that there's a bunch of stuff coming. That is just a very basic, responsible thing. Like, if you own a building, you want to maintain the roof on that building, but we don't want to.
Airflow though, yeah, you're right. We know-
Like
The Willow roof, for instance.
we don't want to
makes
replace
sense.
it. We don't want to replace it early. But if we've got the money
Or
sitting
don't-
there, maybe it makes sense to earmark
Yeah,
that
'cause
that could become
It's not getting cheaper to replace any of those.
Right.
The longer we wait.
yeah.
With the elementary schools, we all know at
Just
some
put it
point there's gonna
aside
be
by
a
the time
building,
you
but
do that
not
project,
anytime soon,
costs
so.
money.
Right. yeah.
but we also know that according to the,
Yeah, I'm
you
saying.
know, the facility study, we had,
Now.
you know,
We're gonna be out
they
the money.
estimated 44 million is probably closer to 70, 80, 90 million. So we know there's gonna have to be money put in the elementary schools, you know, for the
Yeah.
HVACs and the roofs and the floors and the windows and all that kind of good stuff too.
It's
So
fine.
Look at all my
plenty of,
We can afford
plenty of
buckets.
ways to spend it.
Teresa, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Ivan Allen, I think the full school committee agrees with what we're hearing the Finance Commission wanting to do. We've talked about this at a number of our meetings. Bill, you were quoting some of it from the record. We do very much support how can we save, schools and towns together in a stabilization fund, the reserve fund, what can we do? In any way that we could help support the FinCom in getting those requests on a warrant article in town meeting in May, I think you have the support of the school committee.
All right, great. Well, maybe what it'll be, it's at least for now that maybe I can send updates after our FinCom meetings to the other boards, let you guys know where we stand on things. And then, maybe at some point, it might be appropriate for us to have another one of those big joint meetings to say like, all right, let's get all the boards together and let's talk about this because this is an important thing for our town.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, okay. All right, anything else we want to talk about on that? All right, then the next item is action items. So our action items are obviously everybody's readjusting their budgets. Tony and Jeff are going to work on a 2 to 3 year outlook, kind of where things are at with some of the things that we know are coming at us. I am going to write a memo to the school committee about free cash. And then also when FinCom meets and talks about these long-term issues, we'll be kind of sending out a memo. Any other action items I missed? All right, then I will entertain a motion to
That
adjourn.
wraps it up.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Matt. Seconded by Alan. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.